Good afternoon, everyone. We thank you for joining us today for our Faculty Development Forum, our panel on autism. This will be a forum to provide strategies to assist with managing our classes when we have students who are on the autism spectrum. I would like to take this time to remind you all of a couple of things. You may or may not know that I am Mavis Hall, and I am your Affirmative Action Compliance and Diversity Officer here at Queensborough Community College. And my job really revolves around making sure that we are in compliance with our policies as mandated by the City University of New York. One of the policies statements that focuses on why we are here today is the statement that is the policy of the City University of New York and the constituent colleges, that being Queensborough, as a unit of the university, to recruit, employ, retain, promote, and provide benefits to employees, and to admit and provide services for students without regard to race, color, creed, national origin, ethnicity, ancestry, religion, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, marital status, legally registered domestic partnership status, disability, predisposing genetic characteristics, alienage, citizenship, military or veteran status, or status as a victim of domestic violence. In your folder, you will have the statement and the link to where you will find the policy in all of its entirety. All of this basically says that we will make sure that we give every effort to provide an opportunity for all of our students, all of our faculty members, but particularly for today, all of our students. We give them an opportunity to either succeed or fail without any consideration to all of the things that I've just listed. And to assist us with this, we have this great panel who will address how to work with each student to manage his or her classroom engagement and participation, and any concerns that we may have with managing the interactions or the reactions of the other students in the classroom. So let me introduce to you our panel members. Joining us this afternoon, please help me welcome Dr. Christopher Rosa, the University Dean for Student Affairs at CUNY Central Office. Our own Dr. Margot Edlin, Assistant Professor and Faculty Fellow here at Queensborough Community College. And Amanda Friedman, Ms. Friedman and Ms. Alison Berkley. They are co-owners and directors of the Emergency Education Center. To kick off this afternoon's discussion, Dean Rosa will give us an overview, not only of what's happening at CUNY, but he'll also provide us with some information about what we're doing to support our students throughout CUNY. Dr. Edlin will share with us her experiences in the different roles that she has, and then Ms. Friedman and Ms. Berkley will wrap it up with the experiences and details of the things that they've done to kind of make sure that they push forward their professional belief that every child can learn, and how we can learn from them on making sure that our students are given the opportunities that I've talked about.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's really my honor and privilege to be here with you this afternoon. I wanted to thank my friend and colleague Mavis Hall. Mavis and I have worked together as colleagues in the area of disability services and diversity for more than a decade now. She is one of my dearest friends in the world, but she's also one of the most remarkable diversity professionals I've ever encountered. And it's an honor for me to be here at Queensborough, but particularly to be here working with her. And I really applaud her and congratulate her for trying to raise awareness not only of issues experienced by members of the Queensborough Community College community with disabilities, but particularly this growing, emerging population of students on the autism spectrum. And I'm here today to provide you a little university context in terms of where your experiences at Queensborough may fit within these larger trends going on at CUNY as a whole. Many of you may know that as a university system, CUNY has more than 9,000 students with disabilities. The New York State Department of Education indicates that there are some 37,000 students with disabilities enrolled in post-secondary education throughout the state. So remarkably enough, if you're a college student with a disability, your chances are almost 1 in 4 to be enrolled at one of CUNY's 24 campuses. And Queensborough happens to have one of the largest enrollments of students with disabilities in the system. There are more than 700 students with disabilities enrolled here at Queensborough Community College. And generally speaking, I'm proud to say that Queensborough is one of the stronger campuses when it comes to cultivating a culture of accommodation, when it comes to allowing students with disabilities to fully participate in all aspects of university life. And I'm here today to sort of talk a little bit about the experiences of one group of students with disabilities, one of the fastest growing populations of students with disabilities at Queensborough and at CUNY, and that's the population of students on the autism spectrum. So CUNY, as all of us know, and we're all part of it, but we have a historic mission, and our mission has always been to provide affordable and accessible education, higher education opportunities to all New Yorkers, especially those who have historically not had access to higher education opportunity. And from where we sit at the central administration, inclusive higher education is really the next great civil rights movement. When we think of who has gotten to participate in higher education historically, CUNY has really been at the epicenter of where groups who have historically been marginalized have finally gained for the first time access to higher education. In the 70s and early 80s, CUNY extended higher ed opportunity to college students with disabilities generally, where it was denied before. But there have been some groups who have sort of been left out of that opportunity. Students with intellectual disabilities, for one, and students on the autism spectrum. So it's in that spirit, that spirit of inclusion, that the university is really taking a fresh look at the experiences of students on the autism spectrum, looking at their experiences in a new way, but hearkening back to our historic mission and drawing upon those core values when it comes to guiding our approach to allowing students on the autism spectrum to fully participate in all aspects of university life. And in terms of that, today we're just beginning, really, our conversation about being better able to serve and meet the needs of students on the autism spectrum. So here are some definitions. I'm sure my colleagues can do better justice to this, because in the interest of full disclosure, I don't have much expertise when it comes to accommodating in a classroom setting students on the autism spectrum. I served as 11 years as the Director of Disability Services at Queens College, and as a practitioner and as an educator, that's really my frame of reference when it comes to moment to moment providing meaningful accommodations to students on the autism spectrum. But I haven't done that work in almost 10 years, and I missed the great wave. I just caught the cusp, the beginning of the wave of the growth of students on the autism spectrum. So I'm grateful that we have colleagues here who are more steeped in the richness of that expertise. I'm here to talk to you more about trends as I see it, as somebody who is a mild-mannered middle manager at a large metropolitan university system, about what these trends are and what we need to do as a university to build capacity in terms of resources globally to better position all of you, to support you in meeting the needs of students on the autism spectrum. But autism is now referred to as a spectrum of disorders, as all of you know. Autism can affect a highly intelligent and verbally skilled person, or a nonverbal person with profound intellectual disability, or anyone else in between those two extremes. Autism spectrum disorders includes autism, Asperger's syndrome, pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified, otherwise known as PDD-NOS. And Asperger's syndrome is a milder form of autism spectrum disorder. And it's been my experience that at CUNY, we are most likely to see students with some form of Asperger's syndrome. And from my perspective, this is just me editorializing, but the students who we see at Queensborough Community College and at CUNY in general, by virtue of the fact that they're here, are remarkable. They're remarkable because they've managed to succeed academically and exist on this campus without much in the way at all of any kind of formal support from our college or university, largely because their presence here at this college and their rapid growth as a vibrant community at this college and in our university has really outstripped our ability to provide meaningful supports for them. So right now we're struggling to catch up. We know that we have to do a better job. So by virtue of the fact that they're here and that they're surviving and in many cases thriving, more than anything else is a testament to their remarkable quality as students. But it also makes us think about how many otherwise qualified students might have been able to succeed here at CUNY if these resources were in place. And it's those students that I'm mindful of when we think about building capacity here at CUNY. The symptoms of autism spectrum disorder fall along a spectrum, and therefore the symptoms can range from mild to severe. There is no one typical profile. A large variation exists. There may be significant differences between students in this population. They have different capabilities, different strengths, and therefore different needs. And it's important to determine the functional manifestations of autism spectrum disorders in the classroom and beyond, and use that as your frame of reference, individual by individual, case by case, to design meaningful accommodations in the higher ed setting. Due to the large variation that exists, some students with ASD may need more traditional reasonable accommodations, very similar to learning disabilities, like extended time in a quiet proctored setting, sometimes note-taking services. But some also need a variety of other accommodations that might include, but are not limited to, social facilitation and supports. Directors of services for students with disabilities on our campuses and their staffs need to be creative about the accommodations for students on the autism spectrum. The students themselves, as talented as they are and as remarkably strong as they are, might not be well equipped and may not think of the accommodations or be able to articulate the ones that are most successful in supporting their needs. Although surprisingly, that's what the literature says. I've had a different experience, and I'll speak to that in a few minutes. So at CUNY, we have a keen interest in fostering inclusive higher education. There seems to be a growing number of students on the autism spectrum at CUNY, particularly those with Asperger's syndrome and those considered having high-functioning autism. More than 300 have self-identified system-wide, but we know that that's probably just a drop in the bucket. We believe that there may be 3 times as many students on the autism spectrum enrolled at CUNY, but only 300 of which are formally connected to disability services offices. And there's the rub, both in terms of providing them with the necessary supports that they need to be academically successful, but in terms of meeting the needs of faculty and staff who are confronted with students with behaviors that might seem a little out of the ordinary, and struggling to figure out what that means, to manage that in the classroom setting and beyond, and to be mindful of what it takes to support the success of all the students in the classroom. We expect that this dramatic growth will continue, and that's really a tribute to this inclusive higher ed movement, which has largely been built by families, parents of students on the autism spectrum and students with intellectual disabilities, who, emboldened by the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, have really used that as a lever to demand that students on the autism spectrum be fully included in K through 12 and richly participate in all that K through 12 has to offer, to frame the expectations of their kids to be just like any other kids in K through 12, and their peers are pointed towards college and higher education. That's their expectation culturally, and those are the students we meet when here at Queensborough Community College and our other colleges at CUNY. But they have some deficits, and the deficits are more often than not having to do with their cultural capital, and their ability to manage the social demands of higher education. And it's towards that end that we need to be better prepared and greater ready to meet their needs. Faculty and staff will experience this tremendous growth at times as overwhelming. And it's in that spirit that we've worked really hard at beginning to imagine what a different approach to accommodating students on the autism spectrum might look like at CUNY. In order to build our campus's capacity to meet the needs of this burgeoning student population, we submitted a grant to the FAR Fund. The FAR Fund, I believe, stands for Fund for Autism Research. They're a great group, and they fund research and the development of best practices when it comes to supporting individuals with autism. And we reached out to them, and they awarded us $100,000 every year for 3 years to be able to do capacity building as a system to better ready ourselves, CUNY, as an institution to receive and support the success of students on the autism spectrum. They funded us to develop and implement a replicable programming model on our campuses to increase the quality and the quantity of supports to students on the autism spectrum at CUNY. There's going to be a heavy emphasis on faculty and staff development, giving faculty and staff the tools that they need to better meet the needs of students on the autism spectrum, to engage students with autism spectrum disorders, to encourage them to participate more richly in student life and in student leadership, to improve the quality of students on the spectrums, their college experience generally, their persistence, and their degree attainment. And we're beginning with a small planning grant this semester, and we're charged under that planning grant, through that planning grant, to formulate specific strategies about what services and activities to provide, to whom they should be provided, and who should provide these services, and when they should be provided. The planning grant activities include creating an advisory board, and I was speaking with my colleagues on the panel a little bit earlier and extended some invitations to serve on that advisory board. We've had an inaugural meeting of that. We brought together some 35 key stakeholders within CUNY and beyond who have a critical role in the success of students on the autism spectrum: faculty, staff, members of the administration, and our key partners in the community who play a critical role in supporting the success of students on the autism spectrum. And we conducted focus groups to hear from them about what they thought we were lacking as a university, to hear from them about what some best practices are, and to hear from them what we would need in order to build a robust infrastructure to better meet the needs of students on the autism spectrum. So we're sort of taking a very methodical, research-based, data-driven approach to developing a more targeted approach to meeting the needs of students on the autism spectrum. We also developed a student advisory board. We reached out and got student representatives from 12 of our campuses who participated in their inaugural meeting, and we conducted a focus group with them, facilitated by a scholar with expertise in building quality programs for students on the autism spectrum. She was a remarkable facilitator, and we got some really valuable first-person perspectives from the perspective of students on the spectrum themselves about what their experiences at CUNY are like and what they would need in order to be more successful. We're gathering information about supports and activities for CUNY students on the autism spectrum. My colleague, the University Dean for Health and Human Services, Bill Ebenstein, put the word out at Academic Council, which is sort of the policy-making arm of the University Provost's office, and put the word out to all faculty throughout the university to find out what are we doing at CUNY. We're a big place, 24 campuses, faculty actively involved in pedagogy and scholarship and research. We wanted to know what's going on at CUNY already to meet the needs of students on the autism spectrum. And we found, much to our surprise and delight, that there were some really good projects going on, and there were really some best practices, and maybe if we could just harness it and get colleagues encourage them to talk to each other, that we could harness that and use that to help to fuel our approach to accommodating students on the spectrum. And we're going to, from our advisory panel, we're going to develop a smaller implementation panel to guide our project staff on implementation questions and issues. And we're going to look at, to pilot some strategies at specific CUNY schools where we could work on rolling out some of these best practices. We're going to conduct an RFP and encourage all of our schools, all of our 20 campuses to participate. And we're going to select 2 that we think are uniquely positioned to help us to roll out some of these best practices and model projects that we develop. By the way, I skipped that, but our project funded by the FAR Fund is called REACH, Resources and Education on Autism as CUNY's Hallmark. And it speaks to our desire to be ultimately to become a nationally regarded model for meeting the needs of students on the autism spectrum. There are certainly some really great college and university programs out there, even in New York State. Adelphi University comes to mind. Nassau Community College has the Achilles program. Both of them are great programs. The Achilles program receives a large amount of federal funding and is very staff intensive. And we applaud them. We're just not in a position to do that right now. We don't have the resources. And Adelphi is a great program, but it's a fee-for-service program, meaning that students who participate pay almost as much in fees to participate in this program as they do in Adelphi tuition. And it's a great program with a really high success rate. It's just that given the demographics of our students, the socioeconomic backgrounds from which they come, it's unlikely that they could afford those opportunities. And it's our goal to provide the same type of opportunities at CUNY prices, in the ethos of CUNY, so that students on the spectrum will be able to succeed academically regardless of class or their socioeconomic background. So we're identifying activities for the training of staff and for students with disabilities on the spectrum, and identifying methods to involve CUNY faculty directly in training activities. And we're really engaging faculty in how to best to reach their peers. Peer-to-peer seems to be the best model for faculty to get information out to other faculty, and we're hoping to richly engage faculty in that process. So what are our key resources when it comes to what are we going to leverage at CUNY that already exists? Well, our School of Professional Studies, we feel we're able to develop robust curricula and training programs to be able to offer certificates to faculty and staff who are interested in getting expertise on working with students on the autism spectrum. And the School of Professional Studies is uniquely positioned for us to launch curriculum in a comparatively fast way, to roll it out so that we could give this nexus of expertise to faculty and staff who would be so inclined. Our Division of Adult and Continuing Education ultimately we think would be very helpful in meeting the needs of students on the autism spectrum who may not be ready for the rigors of college as matriculated students. We feel we have a lot to offer at CUNY that's similar and I think qualitatively different and better than what students on the autism spectrum are typically afforded at not-for-profits. I have tremendous respect for YAI and AHRC and groups like that. But it seems to me that our students on the autism spectrum, that might not be the best place for them because it's not their frame of reference. Their peers are college-age students. They are the MTV generation, right? And that's their frame of reference. They're not likely to receive that education and training among their peers at these separate segregated settings like AHRC and YAI. And we feel that by virtue of bringing them onto CUNY campuses and allowing them to experience the richness and the dynamism of campus life, that in of itself will contribute richly to their personal, academic, and ultimately their career development and development of their independent living skills. Our Division of Student Affairs, we have a lot of resources, and we're richly engaged in the process of fully including students on the autism spectrum. CUNY is very fortunate to have a remarkable network of disability services offices, all of whom are well positioned if we give them the resources to make a real impact on students on the autism spectrum. Our CUNY Leads program, which is an advanced career development program for students with disabilities, I think is well positioned to work with students on the autism spectrum on career exploration and career readiness. So I think that's a strategic advantage for us. The CUNY Coalition for Students with Disabilities is a university-wide coalition of very empowered students who are actively involved in advocating for access, opportunity, and resources for all CUNY students. And they're eager to embrace students on the autism spectrum and to include them in their coalition. Existing campus-based inclusive higher ed programs, like the inclusive higher ed program at Queens College and the one at Kingsborough Community College, which right now are working with students on the autism spectrum in K through 12, particularly those who are at this point pointing towards IEP diplomas and not degree diplomas, and who get those extra 3 years in K through 12, 18 through 21. We're working to make sure that they study at CUNY campuses as opposed to in District 75 schools. And we can leverage those best practices. And we're working on doing more collaborations with the CUNY, with the New York City Department of Education, where there is an enormous number of students on the autism spectrum. That's where the population, that's where you really see what we can anticipate in terms of the students who are enrolling to at CUNY. What are our concerns? Speaking frankly, we have to be self-critical in order to be able to address them, but we're concerned about our present capacity to provide a high-quality higher education experience for students with intellectual disabilities in general, and students on the autism spectrum who are not necessarily those with intellectual disabilities. But we know from those experiences that that challenge is staff-intensive if it's done well, and we need to develop the capacity. Dedicated staff to meet the needs of students on the autism spectrum, but also investing in our existing faculty and staff to help them to be better prepared to meet the needs of students on the spectrum. We're concerned about the implications of some of the unusual behaviors that people who are not familiar with autism spectrum disorders might see from our students on the autism spectrum, and our concerns for how that relates to campus conduct, for the behavioral standards to which we hold all students in the classroom and beyond, and finding out how to manage and those thorny issues. And we're concerned about our compliance obligations, that if we make an affirmative commitment to reach out to students on the autism spectrum, and we've decided that we want them to succeed, and we run some pilots where we're going to have to bring in staff who are devoted solely to serving these students, what, if any, precedent do we set for ourselves? And is that sustainable for us at CUNY? If we decide at Queensborough, for example, that we're going to launch a model project where we're able to dedicate, say, 2 or 3 staff members to serve as like academic and behavioral coaches to help students, which is a very effective practice in helping students to transition to post-secondary ed. It's a great thing. If we do that, do we set the standard then? And does that become an expectation and part of our compliance obligation? If it does, we have to be very judicious about how we roll it out, because we just don't, we're CUNY, and as proud as we are to be CUNY, we're also resource strapped compared to other higher ed institutions. And so we want to make sure that we roll this out in a responsible way. And we want to leverage other resources. We want Access VR, formerly VESED, to be effective partners in this, and that's going to take a little coercing from our part, because they're good partners, but they've been reluctant partners at best, and we need them as partners when it comes to funding a lot of the auxiliary services that it will take to promote the success of students on the autism spectrum. Ultimately, when it comes to funding that additional staff that is often associated with the success of students on the autism spectrum, when we look and see how like community-based organizations like YAI and AHRC do it, they fund it through Medicaid waivers, which is a world where we've not yet made the foray, and it's complicated, but essentially many students on the autism spectrum, when they would be eligible for Medicaid services by virtue of the fact that they have a disability, and the Medicaid waiver program allows community-based organizations and other agencies that would promote the well-being and independence of students on the autism spectrum to bill Medicaid for independence fostering services. Now, this is way out of our comfort zone at CUNY. We've not really done it before, but there are substantial resources that we could leverage to promote students on the autism spectrum success if we can jump into that world. It's just a scary world for us because we have to deal with HIPAA for the first time, which is something that makes us very, very scary. We have all these reporting obligations to Medicaid, and as you know, Medicaid are not warm, fuzzy folks. So this opens up a whole different world, but with the bad comes tremendous good in terms of the resources that we could tap. And we need the courage to go there. I, for one, have never been bashful, but I need to get people to come along with me. And that's where, that's sort of another creative resource that we're looking to leverage. Ticket to Work is a program for not only individuals with disabilities, but it's a federal program where people with disabilities seeking vocational rehabilitation and development get a ticket that's a voucher that entitles them to procure education and career development services in the interest of helping them to find competitive employment. We are now recently, CUNY is certified as, they call it, an employment network. That's what you need to receive a ticket, to receive a voucher for tuition and other things in order to provide higher education as a service that will help people to become career ready. We just need to leverage those resources in order to give students on the spectrum what they need to succeed. And finally, we have to be more aggressive in private fundraising. And if I've learned anything from my short journey into the world of autism services, is that autism is very pervasive in our community. It affects people from all walks of life, including people with deep pockets. And these people tend to be leading, in many respects, aspects of the movement to improve the quality of life of students on the autism spectrum. We just need to convince those people that CUNY is a very good investment when it comes to capacity building, because the bang for your investment there will be life transforming, as it has been for so many of our Queensborough Community College students and CUNY students in general. We just have to help those investors see that same potential when it comes to investing in the capacity for us to serve students on the autism spectrum. So in many respects, in fundraising, particularly for these well-heeled individuals who are often in the financial services industry, the notion of venture philanthropy has come to mind, where increasingly those individuals want to know that the investment they make will yield a measurable return on their investment, and that they will have a say as a stakeholder in how those resources are utilized. So that's also a kind of a thorny and choppy waters to navigate, but we want to be there. We want to be in those conversations, all in the interest of providing greater support for students on the autism spectrum. So that was a very long-winded preamble, but before I suck all the air out of the room, I want to leave some for my colleagues. But thank you very much, and I look forward to questions later on.
I am going to just quickly introduce myself by name, although as I look around the room, most of you already know me. And it's funny that I have a microphone, because I don't think anybody has ever said they couldn't hear me, but I'll work with it. I'm Margot Edlin. Most of you who are more recent additions to our campus may know me as a faculty fellow in the Office of Academic Affairs. Prior to that, I was and still am an assistant professor in the Basic Educational Skills Department. I've been here since 2003. I come to you as a colleague, but also as someone who has had a variety of different experiences with students on the spectrum. And I've seen them from a variety of angles. I'm very much an advocate for all students with disabilities, in particular students with autism. In 22 years of educational experience, I have taught every grade from grade 7 through grade 12, in addition to mostly freshmen at college, but also pre-service teachers, those in teacher training programs at Adelphi. I was a general education teacher, which I hesitate to say with all this pathway stuff going around, but general education at the 7 through 12 level means that I was the English teacher who did not have any special education background. That's all it meant. I did often have students who had what is called an IEP, or an individualized education program, come to my classes. If they were mainstreamed, they were in my class. Some of them may have come with a one-on-one aide, and they may have gotten other support services throughout the building during the day. There are students who have special needs who are in self-contained special education classes, and that's where it's imperative that you have special education training to work with those students and be certified through the state. I also did what we would call at the 7 through 12 level an integrated co-teaching model. I was a general education teacher. We had a push-in special education teacher come into the classroom and work with the students, because at that time New York State was going over to everybody will take Regents rather than some students getting local diplomas. So things were changing, and students with various disabilities, including on the spectrum, were going to be expected to take Regents exams for the first time and not have an option out. So I come to you with that experience. When I came here to Queensborough, I was immediately tapped by Jeff Kernett, the former chair of the Basic Skills Department, to work with Ben Fryer and Barbara Bookman, who was the director at the time, for the Learn and Earn program, where students came funded through VESED, which stands for Vocational Educational Services for Individuals with Disabilities. And I taught students with a variety of disabilities who came in at the lowest level of basic skills writing, and we worked with them to see whether or not college was an appropriate choice for them. Some of them were coming and trying it, and then we would have discussions with their counselor to say perhaps vocational training is the best option. Other students with the appropriate accommodations were able to make it through college. And I've seen many of my students, including some who have identified themselves as having an autism spectrum disorder, graduate from the college. I also come to you as the parent of a child on the spectrum, and this is where I'm going to do my visual. Mavis, can I ask you, since the camera's on me, can I ask you to pass it around? This is Matthew. Matthew is my only son. He will be 11 on May 7th. And he was diagnosed at the age of 2 with PDD-NOS, as my colleague Dr. Rosa had explained, pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified. What that means is sometimes he seems autistic, sometimes he don't. And that is, I think, the biggest obstacle that students with autism face. For themselves and for people working with them. It is an invisible disability. When they come up to you, they do not look any different from the general population whatsoever. It may take interaction with them and conversation with them for you to realize that something is amiss, for lack of a better description, or there's something not typical about them. And for those of us who have children on the spectrum and who work with children on the spectrum, we prefer the phrase neurotypical and neuro-non-typical. Our kids are the neuro-non-typical. I can tell you that autism is a neurobiological disorder. They have not quite figured out the origins of it. There's been extensive research, and again, I'm going to be referring to your presentation a lot. As Dr. Rosa said, it has been the parents. The Wrights, who used to be, the grandfather used to be the head of NBC, WNBC programming. He and his wife started Autism Speaks because one of their grandchildren was diagnosed with autism. It is the leading funding arm for research in the nation for autism research. They're funding research all over the country, including locally at the Cold Spring Harbor Laboratories in Nassau County on Long Island. They're doing DNA research into autism, and they have actually found that they can create autistic lab rats. And then they can then study them. So what they've found is that to get science. I wish some scientists were here to hear the English major saying this, but they have identified, oh, there you go. Okay, good for you. Go back and tell everyone, okay? The English major. So they have identified that there is a duplicate set of genes on one chromosome that in the absence of one set of those or with a damaged set of one of those, it produces autism or autistic behaviors. And so they're trying to do research. And they've done a lot, and they feel like they're on the cusp of a breakthrough to identify what causes it, but they don't know yet. And right now what we are doing is we're in a management phase. We're in a triage phase. We're working with the students we have who have already been diagnosed, some of whom have identified themselves to us, many who won't for a variety of reasons. One, by law, a student does not have to reveal a disability, by law. If they don't reveal a disability, they are not entitled to accommodations under the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is how at college and higher ed we operate. IDEA, which Dr. Rosa referred to earlier, is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act that mandates what must be provided for students pre-K through grade 12. So the emboldening of parents, like me, who see all the services that their children get under IDEA, and the students who see all the services they get under IDEA are shocked when they come to college and they're confronted with ADA that says reasonable accommodation. The programs that are being developed here and elsewhere go above and beyond ADA. And that comes from a desire and also from a push that you have to wake up. Do you have the number? I think it's the official number is 1 in 110, I think it is now.
1 in 88.
Or 1 in 88. Now, well, there are clusters. 1 in 88 are identified as on the spectrum. Does that mean something is causing it and increasing the numbers? Maybe. Could it be that better and earlier detection is why the numbers is growing? Possibly. I won't get into theories with you. There are a lot of theories out there. They've dispelled the vaccination thing, that thimerosal preservatives in the MMR vaccine and other vaccinations which contains mercury, thimerosal contains mercury, might have been the cause. I was all ready to jump on that bandwagon, then I thought, he had the flu at 18 months and he didn't get the MMR until after he was diagnosed with autism. Okay, so that's off the table for me. He is who he is and we have to go from there. But they're not sure. What I can tell you is that students who present, depending on the severity of their symptoms, can be, I don't want to say frightening, but they can be unnerving to people who are not used to it. And again, when you talk about a spectrum, you can have students, yes, mostly nonverbal or mute people on the autism spectrum are also severely retarded. I have a nonverbal child who is not. He doesn't speak. And so that's a problem. That's a problem because everybody thought, well, okay, he doesn't talk, he's retarded, let's put him in a class. And then we're like, uh-oh, he's not retarded, we better move him into regular ed. Everybody has their own set or a constellation of issues on the spectrum, so it's very hard to pinpoint what will work with one student. In general, what works is being very direct and very clear. People on the spectrum do not do well with subtlety. That is one of, it impacts their social interactions most. Their ability to learn and learn from one another, particularly from peers, is what is impacted the most, especially at a young age. So when dealing with somebody in the classroom or just in general, and I would go over all the things that could identify somebody as autistic, but my colleagues here are going to go through that. I can just say to you, if you have a student who has identified themselves to you, and again, going back to my other point, they don't always identify. One of the things that makes them eligible to identify is having an IEP, a current one, with a medical diagnosis of autism, and they have to bring that here, and then Ben and Carlos in our office over in S132 decide what accommodations, work with them as to what accommodations they get. It has to be an educational disability. People can have autism and not be educationally disabled. And in that case, they do not identify because they're not entitled to accommodations, but they may still need assistance with social interactions. In general, they have issues with proximity. Some people on the spectrum do not want to get close to you at all. They will recoil from a handshake or a pat on the shoulder. They don't want that. Others have no concept, like my son, have no concept of personal space. They will stand here. You may perceive that as a threat. They just are trying to talk to you. So they don't understand. So that's an issue. They are very literal. They are very literal. So when you give instructions in a class, they will follow them to the letter, and you'll say, it's not quite what I meant. You have to be very, very direct. If you say to them, oh, just put anything on a piece of paper, you know, just get any idea down on a piece of paper, it doesn't matter. They will put anything down. You'll say, no, I meant about the subject that we were talking about in class. And you said anything. You said anything. And again, even as the parent of a child on the spectrum, it's very hard to teach them if you don't have a lot of training, which I don't. I'm not a special ed teacher. I had a student that I said to, I want you to write about something that's very important to you. What is something that you like very much? French fries. He couldn't get beyond the fact that he likes French fries. And so I let him write an essay about French fries. Is that appropriate college material? But could I assess that he grammatically, did he know how to put together a sentence? Did he know vocabulary? Could he spell? Did he ever make a mistake with punctuation or spelling? Never. Because those are things that are very easy for people on the spectrum. Rules. They do well in math and science. There are rules. There are formulas to follow. There's not a lot of words. Communication is difficult. They may have very good verbal output or expressive language. Now I'm talking to my colleague in speech there. Their receptive language, their ability to receive and understand and process is affected. So those are problems for them. They have high levels of distractibility. So if you have an environment in a classroom where you're very loud and very excited, they may not like all that input, they may not respond to it. You may see a student doing this. The volume is too loud. So if you can moderate, if you can keep control of the classroom in that there are not a lot of side conversations, which quite frankly are distracting for everyone, including the faculty member trying to teach when you have all that buzz going on. Those are things that you can control. Again, you can tell all the students all you want, and just the young man that was in the room who did the media services is a former student of mine. He's not on the spectrum. He said, nobody wants to sit in the front. I said, it's like class, Jesse. Did you ever want to sit in the front when you were in class? He said, no. I said, well, they won't come to the front. Or they may pull their chair right up to your desk because that's how they were positioned in their classroom with their teacher. The teacher in high school may have had them up here to help them concentrate. They think that's okay. They overgeneralize in some cases. They will take a rule and apply it ad infinitum even when it's not appropriate to the situation. They don't get social cues. If you're trying to get a student with autism out of your classroom at the end of class, and you're saying, okay, and you're packing up, that means nothing to them. That means absolutely nothing to them whatsoever. What you need to do is you need to stop what you're doing. And this is not nearly enough. This just scratches the surface. But you need to put your papers down, look at them and say, I have another class. Another class is coming in. You have to leave now. I will talk to you and be very, very direct and specific. In their writing samples, you'll see that they don't always get subtlety. They don't do well in reading activities. They don't do well in inference. And And so these are things that you may encounter. So you may perceive it as rude that they don't look at you. For some of them, they can describe for you that if almost for them it's physically painful to look directly in the eye. Some students will say, I am looking at you, because he's looking over her, he or she is looking over her shoulder. You'll hear me frequently refer to students on the spectrum as he. 90% of students who are identified as autistic are male. They don't know why that is. 10% are the female population, and it tends to manifest in a lot worse ways for women, and they don't know why as well. Women on the spectrum are impacted more. You talk about, you know, you see a lot of examples in the film industry, and people hear autism, they think, oh, Rain Man. That's one type. That's autistic savant. Most likely they will not come here. They have one splinter skill, really, really good at counting, or really good at something else, but everything else in their behavior suggests that they have to be dependent. They cannot function independently. More recently, what you would see as Asperger's. I'm trying to think of a program where there is a kid with Asperger's. Truthfully, and I say this with a smile, but I'm not joking, you may encounter faculty. A large number of faculty have Asperger's. The thing that characterizes Asperger's, which currently there's something called the DSM-4, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, Psychological Disorders. They're coming out with a DSM-5. 5 they're not making as big a distinction between Asperger's and high-functioning autism. They really are the same thing. For a while there, people thought, oh, Asperger's, it's not autism, it's different, and it's the same as high-functioning autism. So they're trying to collapse that, and so when people say, oh, they're taking away the diagnosis, they're just trying to consolidate it. It's not going to change things in terms of services for people who have AHA or Asperger's. Those students have a tendency to be very, very highly intelligent. Their social skills are severely, severely limited. They may have tremendous knowledge in a particular area. They can expound on it endlessly. They do not catch when you are dozing off. They don't get when it's your turn to cut in to the conversation. They have difficulty with that. They can quote names, dates, minutia that you marvel at the memory. Some people with Asperger's do have photographic memory. They can look at this page that you have it nicely printed out in color. I just printed it out because I wanted something that was concise online, and this particular university had a really nice, concise sort of checklist for you to work with. They go on endlessly on a topic, and you really have to work with them in a dialogue. The social piece is really, really important. The little guy whose picture is circulating somewhere around here, you have him back already? Okay, well that was quick. His particular gift is he is phenomenally gifted with anything technical. He can walk in and you know, the smart board was installed, but it hadn't been turned on, and the keyboard wasn't hooked up, and he will go in, and without reading a manual, he will just go in and put together the smart board and start using it in the classroom. And the teacher said, but we didn't get it out of the box. He communicates via an augmentative communication device. Dynavox is the leader in these devices. You may have students who will speak to you through a communication device. More students who are nonverbal are able to come to college and communicate. You have seen a Dynavox. Anybody who has ever seen the physicist, the astrophysicist Stephen Hawking speak? Are those of you familiar? He uses a Dynavox. He uses it because Lou Gehrig's has incapacitated his ability to vocalize, and also for his body to move and do any kind of sign language, so he uses a Dynavox. And so it has both pre-programmed options and text-to-speech in the more advanced models. My son qualified for one at the age of 5 in kindergarten. They didn't think he would be able to use one. They showed a simple array of devices. He went to the most difficult and started playing with it, and then figured out the password and got into all the inappropriate body parts that they wanted to limit that would have been appropriate for. And the teacher said, well, I guess this is the right device for him. He graduated to a new device because the old one wore out. So he had it from kindergarten to 4th grade. By 4th grade, the machine gave up the ghost, and he has a new device. And so he can type whatever he wishes to say. Getting him to want to communicate more than his general basic needs and wants has been more difficult. Getting him to understand that you can say whatever is in your head can be said here has been more difficult. Until he came out with an incredibly inappropriate word on the device. My mother said, his mother said, don't ever say that again. He said, I will, and press the button. And so this mechanized voice said to me, I will. So now that he knows that he can get my goat with this word, he repeats the word over and over and over and over and over and over and over. So again, he is now learning that he can communicate, but he doesn't get it. If he wants your attention, he'll whack you. And other students will cry and say, Matthew hit me, he hurt me. Matthew perceives that as, I'm trying to get your attention. He tripped the teacher in class. She was moving, and he can't speak together. He said, and she just kept going, so he stuck his foot out. And he said, well, that will stop her. But again, he has to be taught that that is inappropriate. Mother is very proud because that's a very big step for him to reach out and want to communicate with people and try to get them to pay attention. He was at a phase where he couldn't look at you. If you told him to stand up, he would cry because he was confused. He didn't know what you were asking. I couldn't tell him, get a cookie. Couldn't help him something he didn't understand what that was. I would say to him, do you want a cookie? He would cry, he didn't understand. I would have to literally, I'm going to demonstrate.
It is a cookie.
It is a cookie. And much like the character on Sesame Street, cookie, cookie, and this is how we used to talk when he was 2. He lost speech at the age of 18 months, and that's how I knew something was wrong. So some of your students may not have started speaking again until they were 5, 6, 8, 10, 12. 10% of students on the spectrum who lose the ability to speak never regain it. My son will be 11. I'm concerned. I am concerned that he may never regain speech, except periodically, once again. And this is typical of students on the autism spectrum. They might not be able to do certain things, and then certain other things that are completely inappropriate, they do really, really well. My son has quite the vocabulary, which my husband blames on me. And those are the words he's able to pronounce out loud, correctly, every time. But communication is a problem. If people come too close to him, he perceives that as a threat, and he may lash out. We have to tell him, no, they're coming to say hello. He is afraid of hangers for no reason. So you may have students in your class that have these just unbelievably odd aversions to things, and they can't explain it any more than you can, but certain things agitate them. And then the behaviors that come with the agitation can be frightening or disturbing if you're not accustomed to them. Self-stimulatory behaviors can be odd. They are as immature as they are bright. Again, on the spectrum, many students who are autistic are incredibly bright, but you say for an 18-year-old, it doesn't make sense that they're immature. The last thing I'd like to, there's 2 other things I'd like to say, because I could go on forever, and I'm sure you don't want to hear me. But the parents, talking about myself again, of children on the spectrum are very, very, very willing to advocate, to put it politely. They have an expectation, and I'm saying this from, I just was alternately heckled, pestered. I did a presentation for the special education PTA in my school district. in tandem with the high school guidance counselor, how do you prepare them for college? And one mother was screaming at me, you're wrong, my child can go to college. Well, yes, you're wrong that everybody doesn't provide services. No, 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 I am not wrong. And Dr. Rosa will back me up. There are programs out there, but you have to find them. It's up to the individual college to want to go above and beyond ADA. If you have found yourself a college that you like because it's prestigious, but they don't have a program, you're getting ADA reasonable accommodations and that's it. Parents think that all faculty are trained in special education. I had to let them know that, no offense, but most of our faculty were never trained to teach, they're trained in their discipline. They said, well, what do you mean they don't know about autism? I said, well, unless they've encountered a person, they might not, or student. Parents also think that they can come and talk to you just like they did in high school, because, well, you know, we're paying for college. So you may have parents at your door expecting to speak to you, and because of FERPA, which is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, you cannot unless the student has signed a waiver, which you wouldn't know just from being in the classroom. And I've had parents, when I did the Learn and Earn outside the door, I need to talk to you right now. 20 kids, classroom, they're paying for it, can't. So they're they want to be in on everything because they have been all along, and that's what it has taken for them to get their child to the point of entering college. The other thing that I would like to say is, and this is a whole education in and of itself, but Mavis has a small brochure in your packet on Universal Design for Learning. Universal Design for Learning is based on an architectural concept, and it's a way of making your classroom barrier-free to eliminate the amount of additional accommodations a student needs. It also is a pedagogical way of teaching that by eliminating barriers, not only for the students with special needs, you're also eliminating barriers for students who just need a little extra help or a different mode of learning. There is an entire curriculum guide for UDL, and it's like 32 pages, so I did not print it out. I have given Mavis a hard copy. If you're interested, you can also just very easily Google Universal Design for Learning, and the resources will come up, including a downloadable copy of the curriculum. So if you're interested in reducing the barriers to learning in your classroom for all students, including those on the spectrum, that helps. The more organized you are as a faculty member, the more they will seek you out and the better they will learn because they thrive on structure. And again, we'll follow the rules to the letter. Your students on the spectrum, if you ask them to do something and you give them a checklist to follow it out, they will follow your to the letter, literally, and if you like that, you will love working with students like that. If you're more kind of a laid-back person, they will drive you to distraction. And I say that in a loving way. Again, this is my life 24/7, 365. I live this. So as a parent, I frequently have to sympathize with those that work with him, yet still advocate for him, and then not lose patience with him or the students that I have to work with in that environment. So I appreciate how difficult they are as a population, but they can also be some of your best students, and they're very interesting because they see the world in ways that other people don't, which I find, very interesting. And really, that's about it unless you have any other questions. I'd like to turn it over to my colleagues. I think they could better talk to you about self-stimulatory behaviors and some of those things.
So my name is Amanda Friedman.
I'm Alison Berkley. I wanted to start just by thanking CUNY for having us and to thank Mavis for putting this together. I think that what's going on here at Queensborough, as well as all of the CUNY sites, is you guys are pretty much trailblazers, wanting to fill this need, like Dr. Rosa said, that's clearly there for these students who are incoming in growing numbers. And you guys are really looking at how to promote not just an understanding of these particular students, but a campus that values tolerance and compassion And I think that in a world like that, students on the spectrum are going to be able to find their own place and to find a lot of success that they wouldn't have been able to get to if it weren't for people like you guys promoting awareness and knowledge about what's going on. So thank you for doing that.
So our presentation is going to get into a bit more of the nitty-gritty, if you will, of how you can modify your classrooms, how you can use self-reflection to modify your curriculum and to offer your own best practices. So with that being said, as we're presenting in the next 15, 20 minutes, we would like to give you permission, should you feel a need to stretch, should you feel a need,
address your own sensory needs,
feel free. We respect all of your own different profiles. I hope you will appreciate the nuances of our own deliveries. And I would like to point out something that's very interesting about how we look at ourselves as educators, as family members, as people within the community, is knowing your own learning styles. As I was watching you as an audience, I noticed some people with their eyes closed, and I thought, is it a need for more coffee, or is it an auditory processing? Some people are able to concentrate better by closing their eyes and just taking in the information. Other people are going to be avoiding some of the eye contact and paying attention to all of the different sounds, and they're going to be shuffling through their handouts and focusing simply on the PowerPoints. And I would ask, as you're looking at your classrooms throughout the course of the year, decide what judgments you're making on your students and their different profiles. If they are actually sleeping, you could find out how. Go and give a little tap on the desk, you'll know. So it's just something to constantly keep in mind about how you're feeling as an educator, what your day is like, and what you're expecting from your classroom overall.
I guess we should tell you a little bit about what we do. Amanda and I run the Emergency Education Center, and we see children and young adults all the way from 4 years old to 21. We actually have a 25-year-old who is coming to us for some vocational training. And we provide an array of services. Primarily, we do social groups, both after school and weekend social groups, but we also do one-to-one academic tutoring. We do parent coaching, sibling dyads. We do overnights for our students. We do combined field trips with other schools and organizations. And we are huge advocates in the community, both for Autism Speaks and for the National Autism Association. And you actually mentioned the Wrights. And I see the Wrights' grandson, who is the reason Autism Speaks exists. I see him about 20 hours a week. And so I was talking with Suzanne about a month ago, because Autism Speaks, as you mentioned, has a huge role in providing and funding research. And what's going on right now is they're funneling a lot of the funds into early intervention and the genetic predisposition, and sort of early on and even before the child's born. And now they're looking at, well, what happens when these children who are getting services right now and are school age right now start to age out? What's going to happen in that critical 18 to 21-year-old phase? And so that's, again, why you guys are really at the breaking point here of a whole new wave of sort of awareness about children with autism and young adults with autism.
And just to interject for a moment, a lot of these different organizations, you might think that they only have resources for parents or for people working directly in the schools. But Autism Speaks has toolkits talking about sensory profiles. And they're free. If you contact Autism Speaks, go to their website. If you have direct questions about how you can modify your classroom environment, they are available. And they have panels and mentors who are available to answer questions for you and give you concrete examples of how you can best deal with different circumstances.
And Amanda and I are happy to be a resource as well. So if after today you encounter a particular student, or if you think of a question after the fact, or you want some literature, feel free to send us an email and ask, and we'll provide the best info that we can. So this is our mission statement. This is pretty much embedded into everything that we do, whether we're here talking with adults or if we're working hands-on with our students. So the emergency mission is to incorporate love of learning, trust of self and the community, and respect into a fun and developmentally sound educational program for students with developmental and emotional differences.
So how we hope that this applies to you as faculty is to remember the efforts of children who are young adults rather, who are neurotypical and neuro-non-typical, and consider the intense diligence of the team who got them to this point, what expectations you have of them, and to know that the culture shock, the whiplash of coming into a college setting for them, from having had intensive amounts of therapy and support, is a huge adjustment. And we are constantly hoping to see them facilitate great independence, but that's going to be a process. And how much you want to take that role on yourself is something you really need to consider. If you find that it's an overwhelming task, you know, there are so many resources that our fellow speakers offered about CUNY. Know the resources. Don't just offer the resources as a link. Ask questions, go to the different departments, try and have a real grasp of what those services are. So when we were coming here, somebody told us, go up the stairs, you'll see the Oakland building directly in front of you. We asked about 4 more people how to get here. And we really could have ended up all the way back in Manhattan if we followed all of the different directions that we were given. Have a scope for visual directions, for concrete directions, ask questions, be willing not to know everything. Ego often gets in the way of the best practices. And the truth of the matter is, there's very little room for our students to be caught up in false pride. And if you can remember why you chose to be an educator, why you go into the classroom every day, what the new trends of education are, there's a way to be very excited by these students. And we just ask you to hold on to your love of learning as much as you're asking them to come into the classroom and immediately have a love of your curriculum and your intentions.
So Amanda and I come from a background of experience that involves a behavioral model and a play-based, relationship-based model. And Dr. Stanley Greenspan founded the DIR floor time model, which stands for Developmental Individual Difference Relationship-Based Therapy.
There won't be a test later.
Which is a really long way of saying that our relationships are what motivate us as human beings. So what Amanda was talking about is, in being educators, we love to impart knowledge in dynamic ways to other people. And I think a lot of frustrations for me as an educator come from those moments when I'm not understood, or when I'm trying my hardest to be clear and nothing's getting through. And it's oftentimes not only the students, but the adults that create a misunderstanding as well. And so Greenspan, whether you're working with the kids or whether you're talking to another teacher or you're talking to your boss, this quote, for me, applies all throughout life. And it's actually printed in a frame in our lobby so that every single person that comes into our center and enters our lives gets to read it and know it. So there is no greater feeling than that of being understood. And Amanda and I are here today to try to help promote sort of an overarching understanding of what it means to be a student in college with special needs, and particularly autism. With that being said, we often think as soon as we come into adulthood
that the support of our peers or the notion of a team dissipates. And we would ask you to consider, when you have a semester come upon you, what is your expectation of the individual students, and what about a classroom culture? And I don't think that that's something that needs to be left behind in a high school setting or in a social setting. We are by nature social beings, and although our different natures may have us connect in different ways, there needs to be a respect for all of those different nuances and an attempt at understanding behavior that may not look concrete to us. An example of eye contact, there's a way to make direct eye contact and take in full information. A lot of the students who appear like they're not paying attention might be looking this way, but they have amazing peripheral vision, and they are actually looking at you. And it's important to know, are you paying attention? It's okay to ask. How much do you actually take in of what is going on in the class? Talk to your students afterwards, bring them to the side. But in making a classroom culture of understanding, one of the things you could consider is, when you're creating your syllabus in the beginning of the semester, offer a little survey and ask your students, do you have any sensitivities or learning strategies that would be most beneficial? Let them come to you in private. Let them put it on a piece of paper anonymously so that they can feel comfortable. And as you're setting up your classrooms, if you're deciding whether or not to have straight tables, if you're looking at a U setup, if you want to have something be more interactive, you can get an assessment of your students, whether or not they have a diagnosis. Just know the learning styles and the choices that are going to give you the most beneficial and positively created group, so that all the information is getting transcended in an appropriate way. And what you also can do is say, would you be interested in being a mentor or support should there be a student in the classroom with special needs? And if you have a student who is sharing their special needs and does want that extra support, instead of always having to rely on you as a professor or go to their family or go to an educational advisor, you can help them enhance those social skill sets by having a buddy system, by having a peer who's going to say, you know what, I'll connect with you once a week and go and study with you. I'll help you understand a little bit more the gray area thinking elements of reading assignment that may not be as easy for you to understand because it's so concrete. So it's just one of those things to consider in how you open up those doors. And I think these are really, really great strategies and tips to use because they're proactive. A lot of times when we talk about behavior, and especially in working with children with, or working with young adults with autism, we talk about it in sort of the reactive form. What do you do when there's a problem? But Amanda's talking about just thinking and planning a little bit ahead, which can go a really long way with these students, and can actually help make your workload in the moment much less. So behavior is a complicated, behavior is a complicated beast, and we've broken it down into various categories here: physical, verbal, emotional, and social. However, these categories are not mutually exclusive, and I think if you start thinking about your own behavior, you realize that oftentimes your physical behavior occurs in conjunction with the other kinds of behavior. So they're not mutually exclusive, they happen all the time together simultaneously, and this is just to kind of help break down into manageable units different types of behavior that you might see from young adults with autism. The one that you might be most familiar with is self-stimulatory behavior. This can involve self-talk, scripting their favorite TV shows, or familiar phrases that they know really well over and over and over again. We call that scripting. Some students repeat what you say to them. That's called echolalia. We see a lot of physical stims where there might be hand flapping. I have one student who
takes his fingernails and he rubs from the wrist on down to the end of his fingers very rhythmically.
Maybe you guys could give it a quick try with us if you don't mind.
So you take your fingertips and you start at the wrist and you run it all the way down your finger to the fingernail, and then you switch hands and you do it very rhythmically and then begin to blow very softly. It's very soothing, right? Very calming. And I observed this student, and this is actually the Autism Speaks grandson. He was in school one day and he was doing that to help himself calm down and deal with a lot of other things going on in the room.
Self-regulation is a phrase for that kind of
So he knew that he was getting a little nervous, so he stopped and he kind of did this to help sort of self-soothe a little bit. And one of the teachers looked at him and said, "Quiet hands." And one of the things I want to talk to you about today is how to pick your battles and how to understand what's helping a student, what a student cannot help and just does because they're compelled to do it, and what are they doing that's actually disruptive that can actually be you can actually intervene with the behavior and then shape that behavior. So it's really tough, and it's a dance, and you walk a fine line as a professor. How do I ensure that all of my other students are learning what they need to learn, but also ensuring that I'm supporting the student with special needs in the best way possible, in the most comprehensive way possible?
One of the other things that we always are talking about is communicative intent. If you have somebody who is nonverbal or semi-verbal coming into your classroom, it may be a matter of apraxia. And apraxia is the process of a thought or a notion coming from the brain into the body or to the mouth to be able to form words and to have access to the movement that a student is intending. And you might find students who simply aren't interested and want to be disruptive because they aren't understanding what's going on, and you might have a behavior that you want to address and say, that's really not appropriate in my classroom. Can you please leave for a moment if it's becoming disruptive? But at the same time, if it's something that they cannot help, if you have a student who has Tourette's and has vocalizations that they cannot help, and people in the class are responding in a inconsiderate manner, you might consider addressing to your entire classroom, if you should hear any of your fellow students doing X, Y, and Z, please have the respect and courtesy to address it no differently than a sneeze or a cough. Or, you know, let's consider who has their phones going off in the middle of class.
I mean, you guys know about the phone that goes off and it throws you off for a loop, and you're into your, whatever your lesson plan or your lecture is, and you're going and you're trucking, and then you hear that phone and it totally distracts you and throws you for a loop. But do you stop and tell the person to turn the phone off? Or do you kind of just say, all right, that happened, let's power through?
And so what is really important for you as the faculty is to know what are the non-negotiables of how you want your classroom to run. And what are the boundaries of respect and communication? You might consider, even though it may seem a bit juvenile, going back to, in the beginning of the year, what is an appropriate setting for asking questions, leaving the room, making noises, having computers out, and adjust that depending on the group you have from one semester to another, one group to another. And if you should have a student for multiple courses or throughout the course of a couple of years, up the ante. Still have higher expectations. We talk all the time about having no ceiling and no cement. Don't let a diagnosis immediately have you assume they can get away with absolutely everything because you feel sympathetic. The intelligence and the point of them coming here is to grow. And so that means you can have tough love, so long as you know you're working within the scope of their ability.
Absolutely. I feel like maybe Queensborough has some meditation classes for you all before you came here to the panel, because I was looking around and I saw some very still bodies.
There's no stimming here.
There's very little stimming. I'm up here tapping my leg. I'm tapping my leg. I'm flicking my pen over here, and you're all just very composed. Normally, when I get to look at this slide, I get to say, stop. How were you just stimming? But so many of you weren't. But I'm sure that, you know, in longer lectures, maybe even in the panel, you've been playing with your fingers, some twirl your hair, tap the foot, doodling on paper is a big one. These are things that we do all the time. They're stimming. You stim. I stim all the time. And Amanda hates my pen flick, so she gets annoyed with my pen flick. But we've learned over the course of our lives to shape our behavior in socially acceptable ways. We've all just kind of agreed that if you see me flicking my pen, it's not that I'm not paying attention to you, it's just that, yeah, I'm doing something to keep my hand busy so that my mind can focus on you. And all of these things that we do have been shaped over time. And you can help students. I have a student who likes to fidget with different things, but I just helped him put it in his pocket so that he can have a little koosh ball, or he likes these thicker coins that he can kind of jingle, but they get a little loud sometimes. So then you can do things that are sort of under the radar. People don't notice them as much. So it's not inhibiting a social interaction. It's not making somebody feel uncomfortable. It's really just about taking that student's particular need or desire to STEM and shaping it in a way that empowers them and enables them to have the same learning opportunities as everybody else.
When I was going for my administrative degree, one of my professors asked me, if you present a test to a class and 2 students fail out of a group, let's say, of 30, it most likely is an issue of them not having studied or not understood the information. But if you have 15 or 20 of those students failing that test, you are liable for being accountable and wondering whether or not you did a really good job of sharing out that information, and whether or not you just make the students responsible for not having understood your style of learning. You need to consider whether or not you continue on with your syllabus and move forward even if they don't have a full understanding of that information, or you choose to say, how can I do this better? What questions do you have? Let's go back for a minute. And where we do that in the sense of content and knowledge-based information, one of the things, and this is a matter of students coming in with issues of attention, too many video games, too much TV, a lack of critical thinking skill sets, and then on top of that, sensory processing disorders. Are they able, because of the environment in your room, to even access all of the effort you've put into your actual curriculum? And so a lot of classrooms have fluorescent lighting, and that can be, for somebody who gets migraines or somebody who has a light sensitivity, that is very difficult for them to be able to cope with. There may be an air conditioning vent in the hallway that is buzzing. If there's feedback on the microphone or something like that, it's going to be so overwhelming for some of your students that they are losing out on so much of the great things that you've put forward. So you might say, if it's bothering me, let me put it out to my class. Maybe we need to switch our classroom. Find out what the logistics are, how you can modify that. Possibly you go and you have a basket full of koosh balls or those stress balls, and you simply say, these are here, pass them around throughout the course of the afternoon, and you're not singling out your students with a diagnosis. You're simply saying, I know 2-3 hour courses are a lot to sit through. I give you permission. I will give you gum, don't snap it, don't crackle it, and don't put it under the desk. You know, think about how you're gonna get the most meaningful opportunity to let your students all thrive.
So we like to say that we bring it all home, but you guys are working with students at an age where you're not really going to the parent and talking to the parents. You're empowering that student to be as independent as humanly possible and to empower them to go home and advocate in all the different areas of their lives as well. Communication is the key all the time. So everything that all of our colleagues have said revolves around communication. You guys as a peer group are wonderful resources for one another. You can tell each other your frustrations, the specific problems that you're having. Someone sitting across the table from you might have had an incredible idea that they put into action already, and so you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. Just by talking to each other and by talking to your students, you can gain that newer understanding and that more robust understanding of how to make your class function.
So as students have come through so much with so many supports throughout their elementary and high school educations, we want them to feel respected as young adults in the community. And you have so much on your plate already to run your classes, to travel, to deal with your own personal lives. We're not asking you to become a one-on-one for your students with special needs. What we're asking you to do is figure out a way to facilitate the greatest independence, because the education that they're getting is not only in the content area of what you're doing, but in their expectation as a student, as a peer, as a member of the CUNY community. And so you want to, as they say, it's best to teach someone how to fish than to give them a fish. So we don't want to always give the easy answer. We don't want to give the immediate gratification. You want to offer a support, but help teach these young adults how to think. It seems to me that one of the biggest issues in education today, starting from kindergarten on up, is we're so product-based. We've forgotten to think about what kind of people we want coming into the community and how we want to treat each other. And that is, we believe, equally important to what their grades are and how they progress through with content. We just ask that you think about how we can enhance those gray area thinking skills and communication skills. How can they request help? How do they learn what those resources are? And what can you learn from that kind of a back and forth as well? With that, we say thank you so very much for the opportunity to bring this to your attention and for being so receptive.
Thank you.
I'm so involved into advocating and getting to know and getting information of how I can help her and support her. Once they get to college, is there a form of where you can just monitor progress? I don't want to know the grade or anything whatsoever, because I understand that they have this policy where they're not able to discuss things with the parent.
Honestly, Mercedes, the only way that you're going to be able to do that is by having a relationship with your child where she's willing to talk to you. And depending on her needs, how able she is to explain to you what's going on. Unless you have, and again, it depends on the severity of the disability. If you have guardianship over your child, or legal guardianship, which they usually advise you about the age of like 13, 14 to start getting the paperwork in order, and guardianship can be rescinded if the child becomes more independent. But if you have guardianship, everything is yours to know. If your child and your child agree that she should sign a waiver waiving her FERPA rights, her right to privacy, then you can inquire about grades or speak to a professor, or maybe more appropriately a counselor or an advisor, and be present for those sessions. Those are things that they can do. The thing that you have to remember about when your child moves to college, and even for those of you who don't have a child, but the IEP stops when they graduate high school. That is a basis for making decisions on what accommodations they receive here, but they do not abide by it. So that is no longer valid. And they are expected, with those reasonable accommodations, to achieve at the same level as students without a disability. So again, they have to be able to, read at the same level. They have to be able to do the assignments. Extended time doesn't mean that if the entire class had a whole semester to produce a research paper, that they're going to get another semester. That's not what that means. I mean, for a time test of an hour, maybe they'll get 2 hours. But if the whole class has a whole semester to do the research, it's reasonable to expect, with the other accommodations that are in place, that student will do the same thing. So it's a matter of having good communication, or discussing with your child beforehand whether they're willing to waive those rights, whether you want them to, and or if they need guardianship. Usually students who have guardianship have more difficult time being independent at college in general, because that's a very serious step. What you're really saying is somebody who needs guardianship really is not capable of making sufficient decisions, that they don't need somebody else to help make those decisions.
Just to add to that, if she happens to come to CUNY, which I hope,
yes,
we hope to be very well positioned to support her success. We allow students to invoke the waiver of FERPA to allow parents to participate, but we never do it a blanket waiver. It's a waiver for each and every encounter, because there may be certain things that where a student would like their parent to be involved to clarify, and other areas where they want to protect their right to privacy. So it would not be the type of thing you sign it once and it lasts for your career at Queensborough. It would be for each and every encounter.
And just to piggyback on that as well, your students and children are entitled to services through the Board of Ed up until they're 21, depending on their level of need. And there are transition programs, college readiness programs, BOCES and vocational programs that offer support to help with the transition process, offering tours of the colleges, practice opportunities to sit in classes and understand what those expectations are. And so that information is available, like I said, through Autism Speaks, the National Autism Association, and more organizations are offering coaching skill sets and mentors.
In the K-12 system, are these students together with the regular students, or are they separate?
It depends on their needs. My son is it depends on the level of their need. My son is in what's called a 611 model classroom, which is a self-contained classroom. He is with, currently there's 3 other students in class. They don't have 6 students to fill the course. There are 4 children in the class, 1 teacher, 1 aide, and sometimes individual aides. The other children in the class, in this particular class, do not have autism. He is the only one in the class that has autism. He is the only one in the school. In fact, he's the only one in the district who is in district and nonverbal. Yeah. So my district is on Long Island. There are students in the mainstream classes throughout the building, and he is in the building with them, but he is in a separate class. He has friends, that he associates with who have milder forms of autism, are able to be in what's called the integrated co-teaching model. It's a general education teacher and a special education teacher teaching the class together. 12 out of the 25 or 26 students that are scheduled to be in that class have, up to 12 of those students can have special needs and be in the class with that teacher and then an aide. So that's a different model. So there are different models. Students with very severe needs, where they are IQ level and behavioral level, and they may have other comorbid, what they call comorbid disorders. Frequently with autism, students can have attention deficit disorder. They can have oppositional defiant disorder. They can have severe anxiety, where it becomes too difficult to manage and their needs are so specialized that they cannot be accommodated in the general population, either with a self-contained class or supports or mainstream within the school environment. They go to out-of-district placements. In New York City, that's called District 75, and those schools are the District 75 schools that they're separate schools. On Long Island, it comes under the umbrella of the Board of Cooperative Educational Services, i.e. BOCES, and they go to, and there are other schools that accommodate students, and you go through a meeting with the parents and that, and the school district and the teachers decide that there may be an appropriate out-of-district accommodation, and for those students with very severe or incredibly specialized needs, they would go out of district.
sometimes for budgetary reasons. You know, they cut the budgets and they don't have, and this is something I'm going to be facing as my son goes through middle school and high school. This year they're cutting the high school special ed teacher and they're cutting the middle school special ed teacher. There may not be a class for him because they cannot afford within district to have one class and one teacher for one kid. So we may have to find, and there are programs, there's Ascent, there's Gersh Academy, there's a number of schools that deal with students on the spectrum, and that may have to be an accommodation for them. Or what they can do on Long Island is there are several neighboring districts in the town of Huntington who may have a place in a classroom for him, and my district pays them tuition and he goes there. So if they still feel he can fit within a generally in a school district, but they don't have a class, they can say to Half Hollow Hills or Harbor Fields or Cold Spring Harbor, do you have a self-contained class for this kid from Huntington? If they say yes, they say, okay, fine. And my school district just takes my taxes. They write the check out to Cold Spring Harbor and he goes there. So it does depend.
But on the other end of that spectrum, you do have students who may have a diagnosis of Asperger's or even just sensory processing disorder, which looks very similar. And they are in a typical high school setting. They simply have a pullout, possibly for resource room supports. They may just have extended time on their tests. And these might be the students who are like a Bill Gates, who actually has come out in support of his own diagnosis on the Asperger's.
So is Dan Aykroyd. Remember him?
I sure do.
Remember Dan Aykroyd from Saturday Night Live and the Blues Brothers and that? He has Asperger's. Huh? You don't remember that? Okay.
Of course I do.
I was going to say, don't make me feel old.
Oh, please. I just had a birthday. But, you know, it really is running a full gambit, and you might find someone who has perfectly typical intellectual abilities and just some social quirks. And it's just a matter of how to identify that and give it a little bit of a shaping.
Before he leaves, I'd like us to thank Dean Rosa again for coming out to see us. Are there any other questions? So then I think all of our panels. And I hope you all find that this was time well spent and we'll continue the conversation. So enjoy the rest of your day.